warm welcome, thank you. Welcome indeed to the official opening of our Experience Center. This is a very special day for us, and together with the team of ACEA and also with our members that have, as you have seen downstairs perhaps already, delivered a lot of exhibits. We're really proud that we do this here in the center, in the heart of Europe, but also that we do it now at such turbulent times for the world, for Europe, and also for the auto industry. So this, a few words perhaps first to this pop-up center. It will be around for about 6 weeks with space for conversations that I'm sure will be of interest to everyone on anything from the latest outlook for electric cars and trucks to the impact of the US elections, of course, in everybody's minds as well, on the future of automated vehicles, but also on something like the challenge to attract female talent to manufacturing sectors. So I really warmly encourage all of you to look at our program online and explore. Why this center and why now? Our aim is really to showcase what's in store for Europe's future-driven, green and digital, and as well at times arduous mobility transformation. Very important. The auto industry is often front-page news for anything from Chinese EV imports to mentions in the Draghi report to CO2 reduction targets, and it's clear really that the auto industry is at the vanguard of the green transition, but also of the quest for Europe's competitiveness. And our inspiration, and you'll find that also here in the program and in the pop-up center, is to bring that integrated story of society, of the auto industry, and of transformation really close to you, literally at touching distance. We'll give a face to numbers, manifesting 13 million jobs and operating over 200 factories in the EU and representing 7% of the EU's GDP. The automotive industry really propels our transport and mobility needs and is long rooted in local communities, essential to the EU economy. This industry also invests over 70 billion euros in R&D annually. So turbulent times or not, the auto industry is really one of the most cutting-edge industries that Europe actually has. And therefore, with a new policy cycle starting here in the EU, what better moment to open shop with a platform for dialogue, a marketplace for ideas, if you like. And we're also excited to share the strength of the auto industry in Europe, and to show the portfolio of technologies that will support us in this transformation to decarbonization towards 2050. We'll display technology rather than just describe it to you, and I'm sure this will help you better understand some of the issues that we really need to solve collectively, and also some of the opportunities that we must seize as Europeans. And of course, since we cannot work magic on our own, we're really also bringing together our foremost stakeholders, as well as researchers, think tanks, policymakers, and our own industry leaders and experts to engage in discussion and in shared action also, hopefully. And for sure, during the events like the one today, topics that are front and center on our minds will take center stage: competitiveness, but also CO2 reduction targets and the framework conditions to get us through this monumental transformative future. As a major manufacturing industry, we are undergoing a profound transformation towards carbon neutrality, which is a risky and expensive multi-year transition affecting not only vehicle manufacturers, but the whole automotive value chain, from everything from extraction of raw materials to end-of-life vehicle recycling. And we're doing this in an almost perfect storm of fierce global competition, of rising costs of doing business in Europe, also increasing protectionism, and a radically changing geopolitical landscape. So that links to the key question of today's event. In this transformation that is so important for all of us, what are the missing pieces? And we will have a look with the help of research by Transport and Mobility Leuven at creating the enabling conditions for the auto industry's transition and what are the gaps that need to be bridged. And I'm really looking forward to dive in later on. These and also other research insights are very important because this transition, this transformation to zero mobility is currently not on track. And I cannot stress it enough that the EU automotive industry really wants this transformation to work. We support the Paris Agreement and the EU's 2050 transport decarbonization targets, and we have done and will continue doing our fair share. I can mention that over 250 billion euros in investments into electrification across our membership, and also that there are almost 400 models of battery electric vehicles available on the market in Europe today. Yet, consumers remain wary due to a lack of infrastructure, also range anxiety, high or opaque public charging cost, and a low resale value of used battery electric vehicles. And I think it's important to say that it's a situation consistent across all brands and also all manufacturers, including non-ACEA members and non-EU manufacturers. So as ACEA, we really support the present political exchange on the state of the market and on achieving the CO2 targets without sacrificing the competitiveness of the European automotive industry. Because we have regulatory mandates and we also have manufacturers who supply vehicles, but we're missing the third and arguably crucial piece of the puzzle, the market, the consumer, to the extent at least needed to be on track with this transformation. On this point, I think it's also important that I make one other thing very, very clear. EU auto manufacturers will comply with the regulation. There's no question about it. The point is that it's not so much about compliance or non-compliance. It's a question of shouldering the costs and also of fairness. Because while the auto industry is heavily investing into e-mobility, the market is clearly stagnating. And under the current circumstances, the compliance mechanisms foreseen by the current regulation leave manufacturers with difficult choices. They can choose to either pay fines to reduce production and therefore cut jobs, to sell electric vehicles at a big discount, which eats into future investment capacity and also distorts the second-hand market, or to pool with other manufacturers, those that only have electric vehicle portfolios, which means paying others. And none of these options really help make the industry more competitive at a crucial moment in this transition. Yet the fallout will and already has an impact on the entire value chain, from the smallest automotive supplier up to the best-in-class OEM. It's an industry-wide issue and concern. And all of these compliance options also do nothing to accelerate the transition or to increase demand in zero-emission vehicles, which is what we actually need. The stagnating market puts the pace and the success of the transformation and the achievement of long-term CO2 goals at risk. And this is why we call for action now to address the disproportionate distribution of compliance with the 2025 targets and also to accelerate the review of the CO2 regulations for passenger cars and vans and also for trucks. In parallel, there's a clear need for serious investments into essential infrastructure, such as charging stations, as well as for purchase and tax incentives to stimulate the market. And we also need a much closer and more impactful dialogue between the industry and EU policymakers. Our call is not about moving the goalposts, but about having a sober, critical look at the situation and discussing how to make the existing legislative framework more adaptable to real-world economic shocks and geopolitical tensions and, above all, also consumer readiness. So in closing, when we contemplated building this wonderful pop-up experience center in the first half of 2024, we could not have predicted how relevant and how heated discussions about the future of the EU automotive industry would be in November of 2024. But we're really convinced that if we build strong partnerships across sectors and across divides, and when we develop a regulatory framework that supports the transformation of the auto industry, the EU will continue to benefit from a world-leading automotive sector, a strong pillar for innovative, green and competitive manufacturing in Europe. Europe has been an automotive powerhouse throughout the 20th century, and there's no reason why it should not remain so in the 21st century as well. But we need to act now with rigor and with determination. So thank you for your attention. Again, officially opened, and I look now very much forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Sigrid. And Sigrid will be back later on to join our first panel. But she highlighted there the scale of the challenge, some of the issues that need to be addressed, and some of the things she feels we need to do in order to get there. In a moment, we're going to have a short presentation to provide some context for our discussion, and then we will have two panel debates as we consider how to fill those missing pieces. What are the enabling conditions for the auto industry's transformation? We're going to discuss that, as I say, in two panels. Let me just first tell you, in those interactive panels, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. If you are here in the room, you can do it one of two ways. You can raise your hands in the old-fashioned way, and I will come amongst you with a microphone. Or if you prefer, in the room or online, you can use the QR code to go into slido.com and write your question. Only one request, please, can you make your questions as brief as possible so I can see at a glance what they are and who they are for. If you want to share the messages that we're talking about here today, the discussion that we're having about the challenge and how to meet it, please use the hashtag, which will be the same hashtag throughout all of these events in this fabulous experience centre, #FutureDriven. Okay, as I said, we're going to start, and it's already been mentioned by Sigrid, with a presentation to provide some context for the debates that will follow. And I'm delighted to welcome Rosanne Van Pay, researcher at Transport and Mobility Leuven TML, to present the key findings of their study, Accelerating Change, Closing the Gaps in Europe's Shift to Zero-Emission Vehicles. Rosanne, it is great to have you with us, and over to you to kick us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you to ACEA for inviting me to present the study. Indeed, this is a study that we made for ACEA. Actually, it's a gap analysis where we evaluate the current state of the European automotive industry in the context of the European targets to be completely climate neutral by 2050 and to have all new passenger cars and light commercial vehicles to be zero emission by 2035. So we analyzed the automotive industry, but from four perspectives: from the readiness of the electricity grids, the consumer perspectives, manufacturers, and the recharging and fueling infrastructure. So we actually cover the whole zero and low emission electric vehicle ecosystem, and that is also a bit the key message of our report. So there are targets and issues to be solved along all these four lines, and these require coordinated action. So you cannot just solve one area, so have the vehicles there and I think that the rest will follow. No, there are really issues in all these areas that need coordinated actions along all the lines. You should have received the executive summary where you have a QR code that links you to the full report. For the presentation today, because it needs to be very brief, the report is nearly 200 pages, which is maybe a bit discouraging to start reading, but it really tries to cover all the issues in depth. So in the executive summary, and today I actually summarized the gap analysis in sort of scorecards, but in reality the picture is a bit more nuanced. So it's not so, the traffic lights are a bit, there are only three colors. But if you want to have the full picture, of course, I invite you to the report. Okay, with respect to the electricity grid, so we identified 3 areas for the gap, and then for each area, we identified indicators that can be monitored to see where we are today. So with respect to the readiness of the electricity grid, we focused on grid stress management, so the capacity to handle peak demand, smart charging readiness, and the quality of the grid. And we see issues along all those lines, especially with the grid stress management. There are issues to handle the peak demand, and this is partly due to the quality of the grid, the age. So Europe has a relatively old electricity grid, and also the quality in more rural areas is often quite poor, so that's the distribution network. We can reduce the amount of investment needed to modernize the grid if we massively rely on smart charging. So smart charging can solve the peak demand issue, but therefore, of course, the grid needs to be smart charging ready, and this is definitely not the case. You need to have the cars to be smart charging or vehicle to grid ready. We are more or less there. You need to have the infrastructure to be smart charging ready, but there you see that with the penetration of smart chargers, we are not there yet. But more importantly, we need to have, or at least as important, we need to have a good framework to enable smart and bidirectional charging. And on the map, you see that in most areas in Europe, we do not have these enabling conditions for smart charging. So therefore, we conclude that so there needs to be a framework for bidirectional charging, which means removing double taxation, so the double taxation of stored energy, to set standards for smart charging, to modernize grids. Actually, we find that 0.5% of a country's GDP should be invested yearly in modernizing electricity grids. There needs to be a change in how electricity tariffs are set, so we need dynamic pricing instead of fixed pricing. Incentives, we need incentives for bidirectional charges, and public authorities should set an example by making bidirectional charging mandatory for their public fleets. Then, with respect to consumers, we focused on 3 areas: the availability of zero and low emission vehicles, affordability, and accessibility. With respect to accessibility, this is related to the accessibility of the charging infrastructure. I will come back to that in a minute, because we have a separate section on that. For availability, we are nearly there, or at least we are on the right track, so I won't focus on that today as well, but I want to say something about affordability, because that's still a main issue. First of all, you have the purchase cost gap, so electric cars are still more expensive than traditional cars, and this remains a critical issue for the consumer. So this is definitely still an issue. What is less known is the total cost of ownership gap, which is also still there. So you have the purchase cost on the one hand, but on the other hand, the use cost of the car. And the main selling point of an electric vehicle is that use costs are low. And this is the case as long as you can charge privately. But we show that for consumers who have to rely on the public charging network, there is an issue. Public charging rates are too high, and in many countries, if you have to rely on the public charging network, you actually have higher use cost for your electric vehicle than if you have a fossil fuel vehicle, and that is really an issue. So if we want to the consumers to massively adopt electric vehicles, we have to make sure that they are not only as affordable as the traditional ones, but also as convenient to use. And that is definitely not the case today. This picture actually shows the public charging issue. So what it actually shows is the ratio of fuel costs for an electric vehicle relative to that of a comparable fossil fuel car. So if the indicator is below 1, it means that the use cost or the energy cost, I should say energy cost because it's only the fuel cost of your electric vehicle is cheaper than that of the fossil fuel car. And if it's above 1, then your electric vehicle energy costs are higher than that of the fossil fuel car. And we see that the green dots are private charging, that in all countries, as long as you can charge at home or at work, you're better off with your electric vehicle. But it is not the case when you have to rely on the public charging network. There we see that in most countries, it's more expensive, and especially if you rely on fast charging, which you mostly want to do. If you have to charge publicly, you don't want to wait there for a couple of hours. And you also see that the gap between private charging and public charging varies a lot across countries. And what is also noticeable is that for countries where adoption rates of electric vehicles are already high, the gap between public charging and private charging is narrow, like, for example, Norway. So with respect to the consumers, we need optimized financial incentives that target the TCO. So that's mainly for the entry-level vehicles where we see that the TCO gap is still very wide. We need reduced tariffs for public charging, that definitely, and one of the issues is that VAT rates for public charging are higher than for private charging, so we need harmonized VAT rates because that's obviously very much a disadvantage for people who cannot charge at home. And Europe should really further discourage the use of fossil fuel consumption through a swift implementation of their EU ETS2 system. With respect to the manufacturer sides, we actually focused on the battery supply chain. There are two elements here. First one is the energy cost. It already came up in the introduction by Sigrid. So there is an important energy price gap. Energy prices for European manufacturers are way higher than in the US and China, which obviously is harmful for their competitiveness, but also raises prices of electric cars for consumers. So it's both an issue for manufacturers and an affordability issue for consumers. So there's this energy price gap that drives up the price of batteries and production costs as a whole. And then with respect to the supply chain, we find that there is a very high import dependency of raw materials, and the import of raw materials is also concentrated on a very limited number of suppliers. So that is really quite a risk. And also with respect to recycling activities, we are not yet on track. Increased recycling can actually reduce the reliance on imported raw materials. Okay, so here on the picture I want this taken from the Draghi report. You actually show the energy price gap. So therefore we call for the European policymakers to investigate the introduction or the use of a European energy price regulation system that avoids very high electricity energy prices and also avoids the volatility of the prices, because the volatility is also an issue that makes prices unpredictable. We call for the diversification of the supply of raw materials, invest in research and development of battery technologies so that we can come up with more affordable, cheaper batteries, cheaper production processes, and to enhance recycling efforts. Okay, that brings me to our fourth perspective, and that's the perspective from the recharging and the refueling infrastructure. So recharging infrastructure is for the battery electric vehicles, refueling infrastructure for hydrogen vehicles. We have the ACEA targets, the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation targets, and actually most countries are already meeting the targets. Still, at the same time, when we look at results from consumer surveys, we find that consumers are overall dissatisfied with the quality and accessibility of the public charging network. So there is something wrong with the ACEA targets. They do not capture the appropriate network or the quality of the public charging infrastructure network. And actually we find that there are significant regional disparities. So still in Europe you have charging deserts in certain locations. Even in major car markets like Italy, you have areas where there is virtually charging infrastructure. And there is an issue with the fast charging versus slow charging split. So there is actually too little fast charging compared to slow charging. With respect to hydrogen infrastructure, we find that the network is completely underdeveloped at this point. Obviously, also hampering the uptake of these type of vehicles. So here on the graph, you see the share of fast chargers per country in the public charging network, and indeed you see that especially for the big car markets, actually the share of fast chargers is way too small. So we have several action points there. Policymakers should address the infrastructure disparities. They should invest in more fast charging infrastructure, but also revise the ACEA targets by setting local targets and by making the targets more dynamic, because now it's a fixed target, while actually several studies show that the target should be dynamic. If you have very little uptake of electric vehicles, you should have high targets, and the targets can actually be reduced if you have more adoption of electric vehicles in your market. Okay. Other areas that should be tackled is public support for the rollout of charging infrastructure through public-private partnerships and facilitation of the installation of infrastructure through taking away administrative burdens and so on. Okay, so that was in a nutshell our study. So we conclude that currently we are still far off the target set by the Commission to have all new passenger cars and light electric vehicles to be zero emission by 2030. And therefore, we need actually coordinated actions along those 4 lines discussed in the report. So we need to get the electricity grid ready. We need to accommodate consumers by making the cars more affordable and the charging infrastructure network more accessible. We need to handle the battery supply chain issues for the manufacturers, including energy costs, and we need to address the issues with the recharging and refueling infrastructure network that is not yet fully developed in Europe. So
thank you very much indeed, Rosanne. Thank you
so
much. And as Roseanne mentioned, there is an executive summary for those of you in the room in your folders and a QR code to access the full report. Lots more rich detail in there. That was a fabulous headline, whistle-stop tour around a very comprehensive report. So thank you so much. So we're going to have two panels where we talk about decarbonisation challenges, the gaps to be bridged. We're going to focus on two key questions. What are those enabling conditions to create the best possible environment to enable the automotive industry to meet the decarbonisation challenge? How do we turn more of those red dots, an alarming number of red dots in terms of areas where action is needed? How do we turn more of those green and as fast as we need to do to meet the targets? And crucially as well, who needs to do what? Because as Sigrid said earlier, we cannot work this magic alone. She talked about the need for strong partnerships. So how do all the different stakeholders with a role to play in this transformation see their role and the role of others if we're to get that coordinated action that Roseanne just emphasised is so important? So we're going to start with a panel on the sort of political perspective, and then we're going to get a perspective in our second panel from industry and from NGOs. So let me bring up our first panel. Delighted to welcome Bernd Lange, MEP. Please do come and join me, Bernd. He's chair of the European Parliament's Conference of Committee Chairs and a member of its Committee on International Trade. Also delighted to welcome Kurt van den Berger, Director General in the Directorate General for Climate Action in the Commission, better known to most of us as DG Klima. And welcome back, Sigrid de Vries, Director General of ACEA. Going to jump straight in, no opening statements. I have some questions for them. If you have a question, remember, go into Slido and write your question as briefly as possible. We'll show the QR code from time to time if you didn't capture it earlier on. But Bernd, you were listening to that presentation, listen to Sigrid's analysis of the scale of the challenge and where she saw the missing pieces, going back to the title of our event. Would you echo what you've heard? Is that the picture as you see it? Is anything missing from that picture that we need to address?
There are a lot of elements in, and I'm really a little bit full of respect to solve all the issues. So you mentioned the red pillars there. But of course, I guess one fundamental condition is to have clarity in the direction. And if you see the political discussion, there was always a discussion, should we change the path for CO2 reduction? Should we change the target for 2035? I'm happy that the new commissioner for transport yesterday in the hearing made quite clear that there is no change in this target and we will implement it. And I guess everybody has now had 11 years' time to think about that, and the responsibility is really given to a lot of different stakeholders. And clarity is important for the decision of consumers, of industry, of also establishing charging infrastructure. Look to, on the map you saw a green Norway. And last year in Norway we had 82% of electric vehicle sold and also on the road in Norway. So it is possible if you have a clarity in the past for doing so. And then of course we can reflect a little bit on the implementation and on support for battery electric vehicles. So look perhaps to China. So they decided we want to have it, and then really implement measures without costs. So just saying, so in the city, in the future, the taxis have to be battery electric cars. Or the question for the approval, so to get the plate. So electric cars get it immediately, and a combustion engine for half a year later for a cooling off period.
Let's go back on some of those lessons that we learned.
So, but first of all, we need really clarity for the past so that everybody has a clear perspective and also the consumer are knowing this is the direction we will go.
Come back on many of those issues in our discussion. But Kurt, in terms of the broad picture, the scale of the challenge, and this appeal, I think the key message that I took from Rosanne's presentation is this need to coordinate action in all these key areas. Because as she said, when she looked at recharging infrastructure, and when she looked at the battery supply chain, consumers, and the grid, in every area, there were lots of areas where we weren't on target at all. So your reaction in terms of that joined up thinking and joined up approach that we're going to need?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. You want short answers. My answers will be very short. I echo whatever Mr. Lange said, and that's it.
I'm going to press you a little bit further. Let me press you particularly. Okay, he talked about the need for clarity.
I'll say a bit more.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
also,
it will be
just
too
to
short.
elaborate
Short.
a little bit, his key message was we need clarity, we need to stick to the target. But if we don't do all the things that we need to get there, then the target will potentially become meaningless. So
No, you're absolutely right. And I was planning to say something more. But first of all, we welcome the study, and we will definitely study it in big detail. It does provide all the key elements. What it shows is that this whole transition must be systemic. So it goes way beyond the role only of the car manufacturers. And much of the discussion today is focused on car manufacturing, but actually it's part of a whole systemic transition. That transition is, like any transition, is not a straight line. It is with bumps in the road, if I may use that metaphor, but it is existential that we get through it, not only for ecological reasons, but maybe even more for economic reasons and competitiveness, as well as for our security in Europe. I think the study does it very well in bringing together these various elements. Mr. Tsitikotas has also been asked by President von der Leyen to develop an automotive industrial action plan. So we will use the study as further input to this action plan. But I should also say it's not as if many of these elements are not on our radar yet. The value of your study is that you bring it together in a systemic framework, but we are already looking at many of the elements. Let me take the electricity grid, for example. What people may not realize is that this year, the first part of this year, we already had 75% of electricity decarbonized in Europe. 50% renewables, 25% nuclear, only 25% fossil-based. So this idea that our electricity is still dirty is something of the past, and we will continue in that decarbonization of electricity. We will be coming with an electrification plan. Commissioner Jorgensen has been tasked with this. But there also the zero-emission vehicles, especially of course the battery vehicles, can be part of the solution. If we have a clear approach and strategy for vehicle to grids, studies have shown, one published by Transport and Environment this week, that actually it can help bring a solution to the need for flexibility in the electricity system and save households in France, for example, 50% of their electricity bill. Because we need more renewables, but we also need more grids, and we need flexibility in the grid. And electric cars can be a solution to this. I could go on affordability, which
can
is...
we come back on it in more detail?
Sure. Yep. Affordability, key. We hear that many car manufacturers are readying to bring to the market more affordable models by the end of this year, beginning of next year. Surprise, surprise, the year when the new targets kick in. That's exactly what we saw also in 2020. But that will mean more affordable cars for households. I strongly believe and argue that member state governments should look at giving more incentives for the procurement of zero-emission vehicles. In Belgium, where I come from, this has worked wonderfully well. We saw an increase in purchase of electric cars of 83% in 1 year, thanks to fiscal incentives for company cars. So we need to do that more. I could go on charging infrastructure, critical raw materials.
Lots to ask you. We'll follow up on those.
Okay,
Just trying to paint the big picture
Sure.
at the moment. And of course, the other point about affordability that Rosanne was making was the affordability of charging. and the difference between the cost of public charging, which many people are reliant on at the moment, and home charging, and whether that you feel is an issue that needs to be addressed. So, Sigrid, this systemic approach that Kurt talked about, that you've talked about, and Roseanne, what for you is the key? Because it's very easy to say, let's have we need to be systemic about this, but it doesn't seem to be happening if you look at the report. So what for you in terms of the challenge ahead to achieve that?
If I had a crystal ball. No, indeed, we need to now really get to making it work, because it's all been laid out on paper, starting with very ambitious targets. There has been an attempt to take a holistic approach with also looking at charging infrastructure, at the electricity grid, at consumer incentives and all of that. But for now, the bigger part of the burden has been on the supply side, so the supply of vehicles, and all of the rest has been left predominantly also to member states to implement infrastructure measures or to come forward with these fiscal incentives. So I think indeed more coordination is needed, but also more action is needed, because we're now seeing that the transformation is being implemented in real life, and we see reality in a way testify of the difficulties when that needs to happen. And that is aggravated at the moment by a market that is not developing in a way that everybody expected it would or hoped it would, perhaps. And that, I think, is a major issue, because we need to catch the consumer in bigger numbers. And with more affordable vehicles will certainly be one element in achieving that. And by the way, new and expensive technologies always enter the market in the more expensive or in the premium segment cars. So it's natural and logical that they follow for more affordable models later. But in this case, it's not just about changing technology, or it's about changing, indeed, as you said, the systemic element is there, changing mindset, changing habits. You need a charging infrastructure to be in place and all of that. And that turns out, and I think it's more than a bump in the road. I think that's our worry, and that's also why we made this call for action. If it were just a bump in the road, I think we needn't be so worried. But we're worried it isn't, and the time that we lose now, you need to catch up later, because that horizon doesn't change. Decarbonization is needed, everybody is behind it. But the effects of lagging action now, and that was also shown by the TML report, the effect of that will accumulate, and we need to catch up, and we're losing time.
Thank you. So whether it is, and there will be a session, a debate focused on consumer incentives as part of this series. But Kurt, I mean, that is the stark reality at the moment, that we have, by and large, there was a green dot next to the availability of vehicles. We're not getting the take-up. So as you said, the supply is there, but the demand, the market at the moment is not. And indeed, we seem to be seeing certainly stagnating, and in some cases, a decline in consumer demand. So you've stressed the imperative to do this, but how do we reverse that? And are you concerned that we appear to be going backwards in terms of the take-up of these vehicles?
Well, I think Sigrid is absolutely right to say that we need to get around. And it's not because things are on paper that they happen. So I think we really need to work with our member states and with our stakeholders to make these different things happen. The take-up of vehicles, unless I'm mistaken, there's a decline in take-up of any kind of vehicles. The sales of vehicles are going down, whatever type of vehicles. They go a bit more down on electric vehicles because there was a big increase in the previous years. But the way ahead is still up, especially if you look globally. We see from the reports from the IEA, for example, that the sales of electric vehicles is growing by the day, which is an important signal also for our industry, because we want our European industry to really continue to excel in this space. If they want to continue exporting, because today we still have a trade surplus in car other markets are doing. But obviously, we cannot take this for granted. So we need to work on all these key components that the study is pointing to. Again, I could go over a lot of measures, but I think one that was mentioned is that we need to make the price of electricity cheaper than the price of fossil. The price signal in this will be of key importance. I see quite a number of member states taking these measures. We still have a too high price differential in favor of gas and oil compared to electricity, for example. That needs to change. This is difficult for member states because it has a fiscal impact, of course, on their budgets at a time when member states have to do a lot of fiscal savings as well. But this will need to happen. And then we also need to make sure that there is a price differential in favor of clean electricity as opposed to non-clean electricity. That's where the ETS extension will come in, of course. Just to make the link, because some people are afraid of the effect of increasing prices because of the ETS extension, but this comes together with a social climate fund that will be launched the year before the ETS extension. And there are many good schemes already being put in place in France, but also now in Poland, for example, where vulnerable households, those that cannot afford cars, are given access to electric vehicles paid by the government, electric vehicles for which the French government has found a way of making sure that there are only vehicles built in Europe. And so it's this kind of win-win situations that we have to maximize, but clearly telling the consumers and the customers the only way ahead is net zero emission vehicles. So that, as Mr. Lange was saying, there's no confusion, because many consumers are today confused and they believe, well, let's wait with these electric vehicles because it's not certain that we will have to change our cars.
Okay, but you called, and your appeal, Bernd, was for clarity, and Kurt just echoing that. We need to know where we're going. But if we're to do that, for example, I think I read a figure that if you look at the rate, whether it's stagnating or growing as a share of the pie, but the rate of electric vehicle take-up and the rate of building the infrastructure needed to support that, we're nowhere near where we need to be. What is the key for you to getting those two things aligned? Because one of the reasons there is a lack of take-up is because people are concerned that the infrastructure doesn't exist. So clarity on one side, but do we have real clarity on the infrastructure side, on some of these other enabling conditions that we're talking about?
I'm not so concerned that the infrastructure will also increase if the demand is there. I spoke recently with the Europe CEO of ExxonMobil, and he told me at the beginning of this whole discussion about battery electric vehicles, he said that's a niche product that's not interesting for us. And then they decided, perhaps there are some, let's put some infrastructure on the filling station at the highway. And now they are trying to go to the normal filling station. So I guess there is also an increase in the supply of electricity for cars. If the demand is down, therefore I come back to the support scheme for the consumer to give really some incentives to buy electric vehicles besides the clarity. But we had in some member states some support scheme. We saw in France this leasing support scheme for in social categories. That's also important that people with low income have a chance to buy electric vehicle. And also the question how to calculate the price. At the moment in Germany, we have a price from around about 70 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's much more than you pay at the gasoline filling station. And that's not an incentive to buy an electric car. So that's really the crucial element where I guess the member states and the European Union is forced to do something to incentivize the really use of electric vehicles. And then, of course, I'm quite sure that the charging will follow the one. By the way, it was the same 120 years ago with the introduction of the gasoline car.
Sigrid, in terms of the rest of the world, China has already been mentioned, and we have someone who has a great deal of expertise in that area in our next panel, so we'll come back on it. But when you look at what you talked about, that fierce global competition, particularly from China, what lessons do you think the EU should draw from what is being done in China and other countries, and how should those lessons be applied when it comes to make sure that we can, one of the central focuses of the new Commission is on competitiveness. You talked about the automotive industry as a powerhouse. What for you is key to make sure that we learn from elsewhere? Indeed, I'm sure there are things they can learn from us about the target setting and so on, but
car making.
What lessons do we learn?
Yeah. No, and actually this question links to what I wanted to say and to come back on, because the appeal today in the panel here has been a number of times now emphasizing this need for clarity. But the way that the EU provides clarity is with sales targets for vehicle manufacturers, and then assuming the rest will kind of follow, and not taking enough action and not reacting with urgency enough when we see that all the other elements that need to play ball because of this systemic change are not there. So clarity is one thing, but clarity cannot be, a sacred concept in itself. We need to also adjust for real life events, and that is, I think, is what the EU could actually learn from countries like China, but also from states in the US like California, also from Norway here in Europe, by the way, where there is a much greater link between regulatory requirements for vehicles and what the market actually is able and ready to take up. So there is more space for electrified vehicles, which is not the same as pure battery electric vehicles, but for forms of hybrids, for example. There is indeed a greater adaptability when it comes to incentives for the markets, to nudge consumers, to help with incentives. And those could be non-financial as well, so special parking zones or driving lanes or things like that. So to make it more attractive to and also purchase and use these vehicles. Also to adapt in the manufacturing side of things to where the market is, where the cost developments and the technology developments are worldwide. Dependency on the imports of raw materials were mentioned. There is clearly, with the drive to electric vehicles, we're creating a new dependency for European manufacturers, which is something to look at very, very seriously.
Links, of course, also to the discussion about strategic autonomy in Europe.
So clarity and predictability are indeed very important for manufacturers, but not, I would say, at all costs. And with the rigidity that we currently see in Europe, we, as ACEA, we talk a lot about CO2 emissions reduction policies, but one other prime issue for us today is the regulatory framework, because that, in our view, should be made more fit for purpose. And one element in there is that it should be better able to react to real life events, so more adaptation possibility.
So finding that sweet spot between predictability and flexibility.
And that will make Europe more competitive, which is needed indeed in this global context, the global arena with China and the US.
Thank you. Don't forget, if you have a question, you can go through the QR code, or I'll come out with the mic in a moment. But Kurt, just a reaction to that, if you would. And can you give us a glimpse? You mentioned the Automotive Industry Action Plan. We are, of course, expecting a new clean industrial deal to go alongside the European Green Deal. Can you give us any sense of what that is likely to contain, where the focus is going to be?
Yeah, first a reaction to what Sigrid is saying, and of course I fully buy this. There needs to be clarity for more than only the car manufacturers. I do think we have clarity in other areas as well. We have, for example, the ACEA regulation for the alternative fuels infrastructure, where colleagues tell me that for 25 of the 27 member states, the targets are being met. I can agree that the targets are maybe not ambitious enough.
That's also what's in the TML study.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we need to look at how we can go beyond the targets, which in my understanding are dynamic. So they are linked to the take-up of electric vehicles. but we probably need to do more. Now, we proposed more ambitious targets. The member states were afraid of the cost of this. I think what we need to do is look at the right de-risking strategies, so that there is investment going in this area, which is being supported, guaranteed by funding schemes, for example, through the European Investment Bank. We already do this, colleagues in DG Move do this with the AFIF, the Fund for Alternative Fuels Infrastructure. Maybe we can do more there to make sure that there is a quicker and broader rollout. There is also targets or requirements. For example, this is a bit of detail now, but still, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive has requirements to install charging in new homes, new buildings. For example. So there are a lot of elements already, but what we need to do is bring them better together, make them more actionable and more quickly actionable. And that is what I would expect from the Automotive Industrial Action Plan, that we look at all these framework conditions, clearly identify who should do what, and then follow up on this. This also includes working on the whole supply chain that the automotive sector needs. I do take the point that we cannot become overly dependent on sourcing technologies from elsewhere in the world. I have to say, though, getting rid of fossil fuels is the best strategy to get more independence. But, for example, in battery technologies, there are lots of things happening. I'm told by colleagues that in the last few weeks we've seen quite some promising announcements on progress in solid-state batteries, where the European car manufacturing industry could be leading again. We will help this. As you know, the President has announced, together with Mr. Šefčovič, that we will launch a 3 billion call for battery manufacturing under the Innovation Fund, precisely to support the automotive industry in going to the manufacturing of the next generation batteries, and even scaling up the current generation battery manufacturing. So all this will have to see a reflection in this Automotive Industrial Action Plan.
Thank you, and I'd like to come back on who needs to do what, because we will also focus on that in our next panel. I'm going to come out to all of you in a minute, but Bernd, to this question about what you would hope to see in the action plan, and crucially, this comment of Sigrid's that we need to have, yes, the predictability, yes, the clarity, but also the flexibility to adapt in light of, because these missing pieces form a very complex picture, and we need to make sure that they are moving in alignment. How do you see getting the sweet spot between great predictability and clarity and flexibility?
On the flexibility, let's see what is really necessary. But of course, regarding the battery, we are behind. That's the reality. So now we are building battery factories in Europe, and who is building this factory? Chinese people are building this, Chinese technology. So we are behind, and we have not recognized when China created this Made in China 2025 program that they are really executed in a proper way and quite quick. And so we are behind. There's also a problem for some European manufacturers selling cars in China. So they're losing market shares. This is also a little bit a problem for the crisis situation we have. So therefore, for the action plan, we need to invest in a quick way to really compensate this situation being behind the Chinese development. So battery is crucial. 40% of the added value of a car is in battery. So we have to be on the front runner for the most advanced battery, perhaps even new technologies, and that's crucial. And of course, regarding the whole supply chain, we are doing a lot. We have a new trade agreement with Chile to get an additional supplier for processed lithium. That's important. At the moment, we have 70% of our lithium coming from China. By the way, also this has a reason. Why is China processing the lithium? Even the lithium is coming from Peru and transported to China, because sometimes the European industry thought it is quite good, low labor costs, low environmental standards, let's go to China. And now we have some dependency. So, and therefore, it's important to have such an agreement with Chile, to have a new supplier, but also have added value for the people in Chile. That's also crucial, that our transition is not for the cost of the people in the global south. So, and on the recycling, you mentioned it in your study as well. We are investing, and I hope that we can really improve it in this action plan as well, the recycling for materials for the battery. At the moment, there are new developments really have the possibility to recycle 95% of the materials in a battery. And this way, we have to go as quick as possible. And last, yes, we want to have a level playing field in the European market. I'm not so a fan of making a protective market only for European producers, but to have fair conditions so that you can also buy Japanese or Korean, or might be also Chinese car, but the conditions have to be fair. And therefore, some elements are necessary for the action plan as quick as possible. That's really crucial. And we have the model for from the action plan for the agriculture sector. I guess it was discussed in November after this demonstration here on this place. And 4 months later, the action plan was there, and we changed also some legislation. And I hope that we can use this model for the automotive industry as well.
Just so to understand, do we know what the time frame is for this action plan?
No.
No. Watch this space. Sigrid, I'm going to come back to you and ask what you hope to see in the action plan. But let me just see, first of all, are there any questions or comments brief to what you have heard? I have one online. Can I ask you to stand up, please introduce yourself, and please be brief.
Hi.
Thank you.
So Conrad from Daimler Truck. I'm going to shed a different light on the whole discussion. Thank you. First of all, I just have a question on the in terms of planning and all that. You said, well, we have the F here, which is right. We have the regulation in place. Our customers will not buy a truck for fun. It's all about cost parity. If the truck can't drive or the bus can't drive, he's just not buying it. So we need the infrastructure. I just want to give a picture on just a short number. 10 megawatt, that's about 10 trucks. That's 8 to 10 years planning. It's the only thing I want to put here in the middle, and so, happy to have your comment on that.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to come in? Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Stefano Pacello for Amlex. I'm a journalist. I have a question for Sigrid de Vries. What are the 2-3 concrete requests that you need for this short-term package of reliefs that you want the Commission to implement? And for Kurt Wardenberger, there are legal options to freeze or cancel the fines next year for CO2 compliance, or is just not possible? Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me take one more and then we'll come back. Please, thank you.
Alessandro Bertelloni, Fuels Europe, the Association of Fuel Suppliers. I think that we all agree that we need to move away from fossil fuels in road transport, otherwise we don't meet the targets. But I think that we are missing the role of sustainable fuels. So it means the sustainable biofuels and the fuels. Actually, what we want not is to have at any cost electric cars on the roads in 2035. We want to have net zero emissions from road transport. You can get that with electricity. You can get that with recycled CO2 emitted from fuels. You can get it with hydrogen. Why do we stick on just the solution of electrification?
Thank you very much. And a plea that you hear often from industry is to be technology neutral in your approaches. So let us take those questions. One was a very specific one about fines for compliance and can they be cancelled next year? A brief one, if you would.
There were 3 questions, if I may, very quickly.
But I want to pick up on that one quickly first, because it's a very specific question.
First on the trucks, absolutely by your point. That's also why we have a different regulation for passenger cars and for heavy-duty vehicles with different timelines, different targets, etc. Where we need to do more is the installation of megawatt chargers. I think there we are running behind, so we probably need a special attention to this. Secondly, on the fines, let's first see what the situation will be next year. As I said, in 2020, we had the same situation where car manufacturers were alarmed by billions and billions of fines. In the end, very, very little was paid. By the way, the situation today is not representative for 2025 because it's only the situation in 2025 that will count towards possible fines. And car manufacturers have many ways of reaching the targets, including by hybrids, for example, or by better performing internal combustion engines. It's not as if all cars need to be electric next year. Far from. And thirdly, on
third one, just to throw another element into that third question from our audience, how and when does the Commission intend to include renewable fuels into the CO2 standards? Just to build
well, I think there, President von der Leyen has been very clear. We will do a review of the regulation in 2026. We will continue with technology neutrality because it's not only electric, it's also hydrogen. And the President has now said we will make an amendment to the regulation to also make sure that is extended to e-fuels, so that there is a role for e-fuels. But we have to take into account, of course, that e-fuels will be important not just for road transport, also for maritime and aviation. And so also there we need a systemic view. But it has been agreed that the regulation will be extended to cover for e-fuels.
Thank you very much. Sigrid, sorry, Bernd, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that this is a solution because clarity, yeah? So we want to have CO2 neutrality in 2035. And the whole discussion about e-fuels is undermining this clarity, to be honestly. And secondly, also the energy intensity of e-fuels and all other problems will take too long to mention this here. I think we should stick to this. And indeed, for the trucks, and I see also the problem with the charging, we have a lot of variety of possibilities. And in this wonderful fair for automotive, for commercial vehicles in Hanover, my hometown, some weeks ago, you saw battery electric trucks, you saw fuel cells with green hydrogen, you see green hydrogen with combustion engine and several solutions. There are possibilities, but let's not undermine the target. And on the fines, I also think we should find a solution if there are fines really harming companies in transition, to find a way to extend the time for paying this fine so that the investment is possible.
Okay. Sigrid, I'm going to link the question from the audience to the question I wanted to ask you about the action plan. He was asking for what are your 2 or 3 concrete requests. I'm going to nail it down even more, hopefully, in a little while. But in terms of what you hope to see and what the most important issues for you are to be addressed by that plan, presumably you would welcome that there will be a plan.
Absolutely. and I don't buy the answer that there is no time plan yet.
Yeah,
I mean, that is the wrong answer. There is such an urgency out there. So how can we not yet know when this plan will come?
No, Sigrid, to be clear, I can't commit to a timing because the next commission will decide on the exact timing, but it's not as if we will take a lot of time.
Good,
this has
that's
to come quickly.
reassuring to hear. And
there will be the hearing of Stefan Séjourné next Tuesday, and I will ask him the question.
Good, excellent. To pin him down, yeah. But indeed, we need that plan. That's important, and hopefully it's not just a plan, but actionable suggestions for implementation. But many of the actions also discussed today, and also I think indicated in the TML study, will simply take time. And as Kurt said before, none of these are very, very new. And also the auto industry has been making these points before. We need to have the charging infrastructure. We need to have affordable and green energy. We need the value chain set up. We need purchase incentives to stimulate the market, etc. But we are now in a situation where it doesn't add up. We're not on track. And that's also why we need short-term action now. So to come back also to the question from the audience. So we need indeed, and we can't wait until the end of next year, a clear signal when it comes to the compliance cost and the burden of that cost for next year. Because it's very easy to say, manufacturers always say that they won't and then they will. This time, I think it's really, really very, very different because of the point where we are in this transition. First movers, early adopters, very motivated people, also people that can charge at home or that can afford it, have made the step into electrification. We now need a different kind of consumer and a different kind of market in the volumes needed, and that's also why it's so depressing that the overall market is behind, because only with volume, we need to scale up electrification and also electric vehicle manufacturing, but for scaling up, you need a market, you need the volume, and that is exactly the point and what is missing today. So the burden of complying with the regulatory target in that situation is with the car manufacturers, and that will not help, let alone accelerate the transformation and the competitiveness of the auto industry. So we need short-term messages and measures, sorry, but it starts with messages for next year. So indeed, the fines or the compliance cost, because it's not just about fines. The cost is in producing fewer vehicles. The cost is in cancelling supplier contracts. The cost is in cutting jobs because the overall pie and the sector is shrinking. It's about the compliance cost that is disproportionate and where we need urgent action to exactly keep Europe and the auto industry on track towards this transformation towards 2035.
Thank you very much. We are almost out of time, but I want to try to identify where we go from here. And I was going to ask you for one priority, but I don't think that's appropriate given what we are talking about here, which is a systemic approach and a holistic approach. However, whether you think it's a bump in the road or it's more than a bump in the road, what you have emphasised is the urgency of action and the urgency to address all these issues in parallel. So to ask you, if I might, if we are to get this right, and if we are to make sure that all those factors that Rosanne mentioned and we've discussed align, and we get many more of those red dots turned green, which are the conditions to get there, what for each of you is the key next step? Bernd, what do you think we need to do first to get there at the start of a new legislative cycle?
No, this action plan is crucial so that we really act quickly. And we saw that the crisis is there, that not only in the car industry, but also in the supply industry. And therefore, action is necessary now. And I'm totally underline what you said. So we can't wait. And that's a crucial element, to use the time left to secure workplace in the automotive industry and in the supply industry in Europe.
Thank you very much. Kurt?
For me, it's a question of confirming the regulatory framework we have so that there is certainty and stability, but complemented with a lot more measures to help this systemic transition. I think Mr. Draghi said it very well in his report that decarbonization can and must be a driver of competitiveness. And he added a very important condition. He says, if all policies are aligned, and that is exactly what we now need to do without wasting any time. We from the European Commission want our car industry in Europe to excel globally, as they have done in the past. We want them to continue doing this. But if people think that we can do this by slowing down or reverting the transition, then I think that would be very wrong. So that's why we need to confirm the policy, but complement it with a lot more measures.
Sigrid?
We want it to work, so we want to accelerate, and we're lagging behind now. But exactly because policies are not aligned, we need urgent action towards 2025, and then we also need to urgently work on all of these enabling conditions to get them right this time. So more flexibility is needed.
Thank you very much. Will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed? We need to steal your headsets, so if you could make your way over there so we can do a quick swap on the headsets. So one of the issues we haven't had time to talk about so much is within this systemic approach that all our speakers have underlined is so important. Who needs to do what? We've heard about the role of the automotive industry, of the OEMs, but what about all those other stakeholders that need to be involved if we are to address all these issues, electricity grids, infrastructure, battery supply chains, and this crucial issue of consumer acceptance? And that is what we want to focus on in our second panel, where we want to get some perspectives of others who are part of this ecosystem, who are part of what needs to be done for the systemic change, and to analyse with them how they see their role, but also, crucially, how they see the role of others. Because whether you think this is, to use the phrase, a bump in the road with the stagnation in demand for electric vehicles, or whether you think it is more serious than that, we've heard a lot about sticking to the targets, knowing where you want to get to, setting those targets and abiding by them. And for clarity and predictability, we've also heard a lot about flexibility and what are we going to do if some of those enabling conditions aren't in place in time to make it happen. So these are all issues that I want to discuss with our second panel. And I'm very much struck by the phrase Bernd Lange said. He said, we can't wait. And I think if there's one thing that everybody on the panel agreed on, whether they agree on the remedies and how we get there, the urgency of the need to act, particularly in the context of a fiercely competitive global environment, the rising costs for industry in Europe, lots of factors to take into account. So this is not operating, if you like, in an isolated way. We're very much talking about a global context that is challenging, and global targets that are also challenging if we are to meet the EU's wider objectives of climate neutrality and make sure that the automotive industry plays its part in doing that. I think we have a little bit of fiddling, for those of you watching online who can't see what's happening, a little bit of fiddling with headsets to make sure that everybody is beautifully mic'd up so you will be able to hear them properly. But I think we are almost there. Yes, we are indeed. Jackets are going on. So, and as I say, we're going to really use the same format for this session. I want to ask our speakers in this session, who come from industries and from NGOs, how they see their reactions to the study and whether they agree with the analysis, and then to begin to drill down into the roles that all the different actors with a part to play need to do. So let me introduce them. I'm delighted to welcome Lucie Mattera, who is Secretary General of ChargeUp Europe. Come and sit next to me, Lucie. And ChargeUp Europe, of course, the voice of the EV charging industry. Is it pronounced Lucie? Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Super.
Parfait. Very good. Augustin Reyna, Director General of BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. Talked a lot about consumers. It's really nice also to hear from them. And Christian Hochfeld, Executive Director of Agora Verkehrswende, a Berlin-based think tank seeking to promote climate-friendly mobility. So don't forget, if you have any questions, slido.com, #FutureDriven, or the QR code will show from time to time. I'd love to hear from you and put your questions to our panel. Very warm welcome to you all. Lucie, you've been listening to the conversation so far. You heard the presentation Roseanne gave about those key gaps and just how many of them are flashing red instead of flashing green. Do you share that analysis of where we are? And as someone who comes from you're trying to spread that infrastructure, that rapid acceleration in the infrastructure, how do you see the challenge?
Challenges. I'm going to start with the first that was actually referenced by MEP Lange, which is predictability. And I'm surprised by how far, how many steps backward we have taken over the past few weeks, months. We had a very clear policy framework, clear predictability, and that now looks like it's being, heavily questioned. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem because you're in the business of investment, right? If it's charging infrastructure, even if you don't know a lot about it, well, as the name indicates, is an infrastructure business. And like all infrastructure business, it's going to be CapEx intensive. So if you have a CapEx intensive business, what you want is absolute maximum predictability for your investment. That would be one. Two, improved volumes, and that was mentioned, I think, by Sigrid. You need to see more EV uptake. There's a lot that can be done here to sustain demand. I'm sure we will get back to that. But it is indeed crucial to increase the scale, and that will allow you to lower cost. And the last one that I think was mentioned by several of the speakers already is speed, right? Speed. It takes China around a third of the time it takes for Europe to build an EV factory. In Europe, when you want to get your grid connection and permitting processes, it's 2 years. In China, it's 3 months, right? And last point, when you're an EU car maker, it takes you 3 times the time it takes for a Chinese car maker to develop new models. So in our view, what we have is a speed problem, okay? And the discussion that we should be having is not about, do we need to slow down? Is it all going too far, too fast? But rather, how do we run in this race that is happening as we speak?
Just very briefly, why do you feel we're going backwards?
Well, because very clearly the policy framework that we had is being called into question. We are not questioning the pace, the direction of the transition. There are very loud calls to say maybe this isn't quite working. And we didn't have that discussion a few months ago.
Augustin, from your perspective and from a consumer perspective, would you agree with the analysis and the remedies that we've been talking about, the sort of approach that we need if we are, going back to Sigrid's point about supply side, a lot of focus on the supply side, not enough on the demand side. Would you share that? And if so, what do you see as the challenge ahead?
Thank you. And thank you very much, Sigrid, and the colleagues for the invitation. Congratulations for this pop-up, I think they call it. I think you're right. We have been focusing on the supply side for good reasons, but now it's time to focus on the demand side. How do we get electric vehicles to hit the roads and people not only to endorse them, but to be able to enjoy them in a way that is convenient to them and of course affordable. And that's the starting point of the discussion. We need to make electric vehicles more affordable to consumers. In relation to the previous discussion that we had, I'm actually very pleased to hear the commitment for the targets. It has been put into question. If you just open the newspaper, you will see that constantly. But at least it was really good to hear from ACEA and the colleagues that they are committed to comply with the targets. And the question is not whether, but how we're going to get there. And I fully agree with what's discussed before, except with the point on the e-fuels. Because there, and looking from the point of view of clarity, people need certainty. People need clarity. Electrification, we know that is the way forward for passenger mobility. We can discuss about e-fuels in the context of aviation or maritime mobility, but when it comes to people's cars, we need to make it simple. We have already sent a message to the people, to the consumers, that electrification is the way forward. So we really need to focus on how to get it in the most convenient way for consumers. In relation, and a few comments on the study, we agree on the many barriers. Perhaps the one point where some nuance is needed is on the availability, because we have, of course, the announcement that new, smaller, and affordable vehicles will arrive the market, but are not yet there, at least a dealership point. So I think that there we also need to think about how we can get them as soon as possible to be accessible for consumers, but not only in the leadership for brand new cars, but also in second-hand markets. Because the majority of consumers buy cars in second-hand markets. So how we can make sure that these cars, electric vehicles, reach these markets as fast as possible.
And indeed one of the concerns consumers appear to have about them is the resale value of them at the moment. So correct. That's an issue on both sides. Both
correct. If I can say something exactly on that, we are going to publish shortly a study on the total cost of ownership, where we have looked exactly at the residual value in second-hand vehicles. And what it shows is that actually consumers are better off. Not only the first purchaser when it comes to a smaller car, but also subsequent purchasers, the second and the third buyer, is better off in terms of the investment and then what it gets in return. So we do see that there is a lot of potential for consumers to be economically rewarded by endorsing electrification in
But they're not
mobility.
convinced at the moment. We'll come back on that.
Yes,
It
of
doesn't
course,
appear to
of
be
course.
convinced. Christian, from your perspective, and can I also immediately bring in, you have enormous expertise in the Chinese market as well. I know you've worked in China and you've done a lot of work, a lot of studies on what the Chinese are doing. In terms of the study and the gaps we see, and if we compare what is happening in Europe with what is happening in China, are some of the gaps the same, or are they managing to overcome these problems in a way that we can learn from?
No, I think they overcame some of the challenges, but they still have also a lot of challenges. Two things I think we can learn from is first, also in China, it was a long time a market which was driven by policies and regulation. Now it's I would call it a more natural market, which is consumer driven. But at the beginning, it was also a policy and regulatory driven market, and we didn't overcome this period. So I absolutely agree with this report that we need to have additional regulatory and policy approaches to drive the market. By the way, we already did similar studies 3-4 years ago. Unfortunately, the automotive industry was not among the supporters of those studies. So I think we could already see that this situation which we have at the moment is there. The second thing which I think with regard to China, which we have to be really very clear and open, is that we cannot shift from deep dependency on China. Especially this is true for the German car makers. I mean, we are at the peak of dependency from the Chinese markets and from the Chinese suppliers and so on, to independency. But I think what we have to work on is to come to an interdependency. What I mean by this is that we have to agree that we have in the future also to put policies in place to bring the Chinese suppliers, bring the Chinese battery industry and the Chinese automotive industry to Europe, investing in Europe, and building cooperation and industrial cooperation with the European and with the German car industry. Because otherwise, if we now reduce the pace in this transition, we will definitely not only not meet the targets for climate action, but we definitely also will widen the gap in competitiveness compared to the Chinese automakers.
Can I just quickly follow up in terms of, you said it was regulation policy driven, it's now consumer driven. What for you was the key to that switch so that the demand became the driver rather than the regulation?
Now, I mean, the products are now really convincing. The Chinese love their electric vehicles, and they love the vehicles from local producers. Now you have this also the infotainment system. It's, very much linked electrification with also the connected car, with autonomous driving, with a lot of digital services in the car. And they love to have these vehicles, and we are not ready there. I mean, Volkswagen did have to buy parts of Xiaopeng, which is software. It was a software company producing voice recognition software. Entering in the automotive market, they had the best software, and Volkswagen had the worst, so they had to adopt to it. So now, understanding the customer needs, what the customer wants, is very important. And to be clear, why we have also a stagnation or a declining market is also partly, real, or the reason is also partly because we are talking very bad about e-mobility in the public. If we talk about these challenges about e-mobility, sometimes this is understood that these products are not good. And then the customer says, oh, then I don't buy it. Or we have a transport minister in Germany saying e-fuels could be the solution. And then the customer says, well, then let's wait for this e-fuels.
But
But you cannot wait for this.
But hang on.
It's
Yeah,
not
but hang on. Hold on. I want to come back because it's not just about do I like the vehicle or do I not. We've heard already about the concerns that people have about the charging infrastructure, about the cost of charging in public places and so on. So it isn't just is this a sexy vehicle that I like, Lucie? It's more fundamental, isn't it? It's people are anxious about how they're going to be able to use these cars, and therefore your role, and I want to ask each of you how you see your roles within this systemic approach, but we have to address all of those issues, don't we?
Mm-hmm. I want to first compliment maybe a point that you made on China. So yes, so China, there was the subsidies, roughly $100 billion in the last decade, so massive. There's the innovation part that you mentioned, and I think we tend to forget what they have as a massive advantage, which is scale, right? They just have a giant internal pool of consumers. And that's also where I think the EU can help, right? So in Europe, we still have, at least certainly from the EV charging infrastructure, a lot of fragmentation, but we're very good at building the single market. We've been doing that for 30 years. It's not complete. If we take it a few steps forward, then you can maybe reach the kind of scale that China has been able to have, and that I think was also one of the key factors in their transformation.
And other issues to build that scale? I mean, there was mention of public procurement very briefly in Roseanne's presentation. Are there things we can do, more things we can do to build that scale in Europe?
Well, I can speak from the perspective of charging infrastructure for us. So if you look at the members that we have in the membership, many of them, they're not very big. So we have Shell and BP, etc. They'll be fine, all right. And then we have, companies that 3 years ago didn't exist. Literally, 3 years ago didn't exist, right? And so they started as startups, right? And now they are in that phase where it's more scale-ups and they're expanding, to European markets. But they're still quite small, around 100, 150 employees. That's quite small, right, for companies. Well, for those companies, every single administrative process that you put in their way, it's a giant burden for them. It really is, right? And so that's a really simple thing that you can do. Lighten a little bit, the administrative processes, because large companies will be fine. For small companies, when you have, 100, 150 people in your staff, it is a giant, massive headache that you need to deal with 200,000 different permitting processes across the EU. That doesn't work, right? And speaking of scale, well, you can scale when you have that kind of fragmentation, right? So that's a big burden for us.
Augustin?
Yeah. Building on that, for me, it's not about having access to a fancy car. It's much more complex than that. And it's a question of market, or you would say markets design. Because we have the markets of electric vehicles, but also the market of charging infrastructure, public and private. And what we also see, and I totally agree with you, that how easy all these topics can be polarized and politicized, and people get lost.
Yeah.
People get lost. If one day you read that now we move to e-fuels, then the day after that there is a minister criticizing electric vehicles, others that get a company car which is an electric vehicle, but in other countries not, that simply is too confusing. People like convenience and clarity, and that is the responsibility of the policymakers. Just to come also to the point of the incentives. Price of electricity versus the price of gas. Number one, access to infrastructure and to be able to charge at affordable prices. Because I'm sorry, but if you need to go to the supermarket and then you need to stop to charge and you have to wait 30 minutes to charge your car, I don't think that's the most convenient way of doing things. Pricing of charging, that was clear. The huge difference. That is unbelievable. And these are the type of things that keep away people from endorsing these technologies. But if we make things easier for people, they will endorse it, because we know that economically speaking, it's interesting for people to have electric vehicles.
You used the word in answer to my first question, convenience. It has to be convenient.
Easy.
Hence we go back to this systemic approach, because these are all, Christian, aren't they, elements and aspects of convenience? Easy charging, fast charging, price of charging, we haven't talked so much about electricity grid congestion and the concern about stress management and so on, but all of these issues in the consumer's mind come together.
Yeah.
We're at risk of being in a chicken and egg situation, because you said earlier, if you produce the great vehicles, they're going to want them. But how do we get this genuinely systemic approach, do you believe?
Only by cooperation. I mean, coming back to China, talking about the platform which is called China EV 100. There you have 10 ministries reporting annually what they do to bring the market forward. And they have to report, and if they don't perform right, they get sanctions, right? So, I mean, here we have really still a scattered situation and a scattered debate. And maybe in Brussels, even more than in Berlin, but don't blame the others. We have enough problems on our own. No, but definitely it needs more cooperations. Also on the regulatory side, we have to have more cooperations between the ministries and having more cooperations to see what is needed, because I totally agree it's a complex system, and only if one thing is missing, we could fail.
Yeah.
And this is which makes it quite complicated, because one thing will always lag behind. So keeping all in the same, balance and in a good balance is a huge challenge for us. And I think this is only can be done by having more cooperations between the industry, between the regulators and the governments, the consumers, and different part of the industry. I mean, we have a platform. I wouldn't call it a platform. We have annual meetings in our chancellor's office. We can participate in it, and there the energy supplier, they say, if you really promise me that we have 15 million EVs on the road in 2030 in Germany, we will build you golden charging infrastructure for free, because then it's a business case. But if you say we have only 2 million and we roll out a lot of charging and megawatt chargers and whatever, then definitely it was stranded assets. And that's why we have to see how we have to put all the balls and keep the balls in the air.
Absolutely. Lucie, I want to come back to you on the building of the business case, but Augustine, you wanted to react to that. And let me ask you what I asked the last panel about, what does this mean in terms of, we've heard about an action plan, we don't know when, but he says soon. We know we have a clean industrial deal to go alongside the European Green Deal. What does all this mean in terms of how we make sure, because the way I'm hearing it is you need to pull all these levers simultaneously. Easy to say, not so easy to do.
Yeah. I think from our point of view, we need to look at demand-side policies. So how do we help people to benefit from the transition, broadly speaking, but in particular in the case of electric vehicles, to endorse electrification mobility? France, the social leasing program they have helped massively for people to purchase electric vehicles. Belgium, it was mentioned also by Kurt, the case of the electrification of corporate fleets. Well, but this is the fastest way that you can have to get electric vehicles in second-hand markets, where people will go and buy them. And like that, we can also create a scalability. Because by just waiting for people to go and buy a brand new car, let's face it, I will not say living, we are still transitioning this cost of living crisis, where people, they don't have 40K, 30K to go and buy a new car. But they might have some possibility to buy a second-hand car. And we need to create that market. And that market, we're going to create it with the right interventions. So, for example, having an obligation for the electrification of large corporate fleets. Because sooner or later, those cars will end up in second-hand markets. And people will be able to afford them and buy them. So we need to really look at these different demand-side policies that, at the end of the day, they are translated into helping people to embrace the transition.
Thank you. Lucie, to this point about business cases, and you mentioned you've got some members who, very recent startups, babies in this sector. What for them is the key? And I think Christian is really saying, look, if you get everyone around the table and they say, we guarantee we'll do this, which gives you a business case to do that, is that conversation happening now? And if it's not, how do we make sure it happens in the way? Because of this disparity between the number of electric vehicles, even if stagnating, that are being bought, and the infrastructure that's needed to support that is huge.
No, I'm going to push back on that one.
Good.
That is not correct. So first of all, and I'm going to go back to a point that you made on the previous panel, because it's just, there's so much data that is flying left and right, and we just have to make sure it's accurate, right? So last year, the rollout of EV charging infrastructure was superior to the EV uptake.
Okay.
That was faster. this year, 2024, considering how EV sales are going, I don't have the numbers yet because the end of the year is not there yet. We expect it will be the same. Okay, so let's keep that in mind, right? On what is the business model? The business model typically of a charge point operators, because that's the role that most people have in mind. Simple. Someone comes to charge, you sell the energy. That's it. It's really basic. So the more EVs you have that come to your station, the more money you make. That is incredibly simple, which means that we need to work in perfect symbiosis with the EV side, right? And most of the time, and the grid, right? Most of the time, when I think of EV charging and rather e-mobility in general, we really have to push our imagination because of most of the limitations in the debate are linked to the fact that people think about EV e-mobility as just an extension of the ICE world, and it's not. It is not. We're not trying to replicate the world of the combustion engine. Absolutely not. Okay. So think of EV charging and e-mobility like a living organism. Let's say the head is the EV and the heart is the charging, and let's say the blood flow is the grid. Okay, all of that needs to work in perfect unison, in perfect sync. If one of those parts fail, everything fails. Okay. That means we need to move from the current discussion, which is around everybody has to do something, right? It is an ecosystem that will succeed together or fail together. And as long as we are stuck with the vision from the previous world, we're not having the right discussion. So that's the first one. Then people continue, I want to address one of the points that you made. Right? What about DC charging? What about fast charging, et cetera, et cetera? Again, we are being limited by the discussion of how the previous world looked like. Yes. In the new world that's emerging, with your EV, you already are able to charge on the subway, right? Like for the traditional car, you're already able to charge in the street. And then what? You can charge at home. Can you do that with your normal car? No, you cannot. You would be able to charge at the ACEA, at the Decathlon, in a restaurant, the gym club, what have you, the hotel, etc. Can you do all of that with your traditional car? No, you cannot. Those are new possibilities that are being developed, that are being created, that are emerging from this world that didn't exist before. So when we have this discussion about, well, those are things that I used to do that I can no longer do, usually that's not true. 2, what are the things that you can do more that you weren't able to do before that we are creating those solutions, those opportunities, right? And that's when I think maybe of the aspect, when you say the consumer is not so convinced, does the consumer even know that you can go to IKEA or Decathlon and charge your car there? Probably not, right? So let's push that also to show, well, maybe it would not be exactly like before, right? Does this mean it's less good? Probably not. You have new options you're not even aware of.
Augustin, I'll give you a chance to react to that, but let me just see. There are no written questions at the moment. Let me take a couple from the room. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lauren Could from the FI Region 1, and very happy to participate in that. I mean, 2 very short points and a question. Indeed, I would side with you. We looked into the roadside assistance of EVs. They're very little. They're very close to charging stations. Some of our members have invested in having mobile chargers. They barely use it because usually the charging point is close enough. We also see in surveys of consumers that their anxieties from the beginning don't materialize. So basically, you're super stressed about charging before purchasing a car. After you have the experience, that just drops. One element to the study of TU, the grid and bidirectional charges. Once again, our members do test quite a lot. The energy output of the vehicles is not sufficient, according to a recent test, to cater for that beautiful synergies of the different things. So for us, this is kind of a bit of a far-reaching dream. Looking into liability afterwards, we could have a look at that. For me, the single issue that remains is affordability, for sure. I know you've touched upon this, but what do you think, and maybe both you, ChargeUp Europe and Augusti, at European level, what are the levers you see? Because that's definitely the key problems. It's not people don't want them, it's people can't afford them. And once they actually own one, they don't go back.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other points? Let me take one more and then we'll come back to you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Lars Hummel. I'm representing the eFuel Alliance, so 180 companies along the value chain of e-fuel production. I wanted to really stress, because it was already mentioned a few times, that e-fuels are maybe not for the road sector. If you want to substantially bring down emission of road, you need e-fuels, renewable fuels in general, so there is no way to avoid that, even if you only look at the current fleet. With view to fuel consumption, road sector is key. Even if you look at maritime and aviation industry, if you want to scale sustainable fuels there, you have to include road sector somehow into production capacity. and to also react to the electricity that was earlier mentioned. If you see that we have 50% green electricity, that is true, but we look at an energy system that is not only electricity, so you also need to green that. And last comment, only short, I would have loved to see also the manufacturer, the supplier side, because if we see currently every newspaper is reporting on job cuts, so to me the consumer perspective here is also the production side for suppliers.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's come back on this affordability question because it seems to be absolutely central. Augustin, please.
Yes, on the affordability, I totally agree. I think that is the barrier number one. There are different things can be done. One of the things that we have been asking, and they also with other partners, is to force large corporate fleets to have electric vehicles, because that will help you to get in the second-hand market more EVs that can be purchased at cheaper prices. So that's kind of an easy way to start.
The real key is developing that second-hand market more than the upfront cost of a new vehicle.
Well, I think there are two things. One thing doesn't exclude the other.
Yeah.
You know, there are consumers that want to buy a new car, consumers that want to buy a second-hand car. So one thing should not exclude the other. Now, we need to make sure that in the second-hand market also they reach smaller, affordable vehicles. So that means that in the primary market, you need to have these vehicles in the first place. It's very good that there are announcements that there will be new vehicles arriving in the market, are not yet there, but we need to make sure that are accessible. There is also the question of fiscal incentives. You know? So if you have more efficient cars, for example, with more efficient batteries, you can provide, at national level, some fiscal incentives. That's why one of the things that we have been asking is to have, for example, an eco score for batteries. Because there you could have a benchmark that would enable you to purchase a car with a very efficient battery that benefit for certain tax benefits. So this type of the measures could help to increase or to facilitate the access to more affordable vehicles. So it's not only one single measure that is going to do the trick. It's a combination of demand-side policies that will enable ultimately that consumer can have access to cheaper cars. And another point that I think is extremely important, something that can be done at the European level or should be done at the European level, is enforce the rules that we have. For example, consumers should be able to benefit in their homes of dynamic tariffs to charge their cars. No? But in 10 member states, we have only 30% of the rollout of smart meters. So the dynamic tariff doesn't exist at all. So we need to start also from that side, making it easier for people to charge it in a more affordable
just
manner.
Illustrating how systemic this needs to be. A word, Christian, if you would, to affordability, but also to this question of e-fuels, because argument there, I think it was Augustin said earlier, you know, you confuse the consumer if we're talking e-fuels and electrification. The automotive industry has always appealed for tech neutrality. You tell us what we need to do, we'll work out how to get there. But an argument there, without road vehicles, you won't get the scale.
No, I think in general, totally agreed that we need e-fuels for the green transformation, and that there will be e-fuels for aviation, for maritime transport, for chemical industry. A huge demand is there. But if we have a merit order, who will pay for it, for the surplus and for the premium on e-fuels to decarbonize? Then the road sector is the least, who is least interested in paying for it. And this is, for me, a reason why we don't see a huge role. It's not the transformative role of e-fuels. You might have e-fuels at the end in the fuel as a fuel mix. So for the vehicle fleet in stock, using e-fuels in addition, because you're producing e-fuels for aviation anyhow. So there's also a split for the road sector, but it will not be the transformative driver. The transformative driver is electrification of road transport because it's so much more efficient. You can have, if you need 1 kilowatt hour for a certain kilometer amount with an battery electric vehicle, you need 7 to 6 times more electricity, renewable electricity for driving a combustion engine car with e-fuels. So the price will be much higher. And if you say this could be something for people who cannot afford an EV, that's not the case.
Thank you. Lucie, quick reaction, if you would, to that, and then I want to ask each of you to identify a key next step before we wrap up.
Yeah, affordability key. Augustine, I think, identified already the levers that are available. There's taxation, of course, corporate fleets. I mean, the cheapest EV is still twice the price of the cheapest ACEA car, right? So there's probably room for progress. But as you said, there's also the solution that can be deployed around that to lower the total cost, right? Like smart charging being one. If you charge at night when electricity is cheap, then, perfect solution. Yeah.
We are almost out of time. A question has just come in, which I'm going to just read out because we're going to come back on this issue of consumers in subsequent events as part of this series. So let me just throw this into the mix to be discussed later. Alessio Ballatore says, what evidence do you have of EV drivers being so relaxed about charging? Can you please either pull out or run a survey, particularly of company car drivers who have not chosen not to drive an EV? You may discover a bit of a different reality. I'm sure an issue come back to during these discussions. But before we close, and I want to invite Sigrid back just to very briefly reflect on what we've heard. For each of you, and Christian, I'll start with you this time. Lucie said, and I love the phrase, we need to work in perfect symbiosis.
Yeah.
And Sigrid said, we can't work magic on our own. We need to do this together. For each of you, a key next step, accepting this is holistic, but as we go away from here at the beginning of a new EU legislative cycle, what for you is the key next step to make sure that we get this symbiosis, that we get this systemic approach that you've all been underlining all morning is so important? Very briefly, if you would. Christian first.
Let me have two, please. First is, because we didn't talk about a lot, is for me the battery supply chain. It was touched least, but I think it's really important. And it's really important to understand, even if we don't like it, that without the Chinese battery manufacturer, we will not be able, and without cooperation with them, we will not be able to catch up for global competitiveness in the traction battery market. So coming to a cooperation with them in Europe, under European regulation and with European roles, this is for me a very important thing. And second, inconvenient truth, people who like mobility transition, mode shift, they don't like me for this, but definitely it's necessary to force also our cities to make plans how to roll out charging infrastructure for 100% electrification of road transport in the city. And this can be linked to the SUMP, to the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans. And people or cities are a little bit cautious and resistant. But in China, they were, I would say, even more important, the regulation on the local level than the regulation on the national level. So
an issue we haven't had time to touch on so much, but when we talk about all players, that local level, that community level, going to be absolutely crucial. Augustine, your key next step.
It's looking at incentives for consumers to increase uptake. You said that electric mobility is going to be different. I would say they are going to be different and better. And we need to show to people it's going to be better, because if you show that it's something that is not only convenience but it's going to improve the status quo, then you will get them on board.
Thank you very much, Lucie. You have the last word.
Yeah, without identifying a particular action, because there's a long list, but maybe it's more how we make decisions,
exactly.
Right? And so in the US, you have some good practices, right? They've understood that for e-mobility, what you do, you integrate energy and transport by digital means, so you need to work across silos, especially administrative silos. So what they've done, the US administration has established a joint transport and energy office, which brings together all those different points and actors and stakeholders. And so ideally, for the new commission, we would have something similar to that would bring together, all the different people, decision makers within the commission that have a say and will make the decision on how to shape that ecosystem.
And on that note, will you thank our panel very much indeed for a great discussion. Thank you so much. You may return to the comfy seats. Before we close, very, very briefly, I want to ask Sigrid de Vries, our host today, to come back onto the stage. And Sigrid, I just wanted to get a sense from you of what you will take away from this conversation. What struck you most when you talked at the beginning about this being a call for action, and we saw that whole list of areas where action is needed. What do you take away most from today's discussion?
Well, I think there is a lot of shared sense of urgency, that there is indeed a need for action, and I think that's already a plus. That's a bonus, because that's very much needed. That's where it starts, and I think the discussion today also really showed that it's so multidimensional and so many actors and players are needed, and they need to work together. We could hear very controversial views at times as well, but that's okay, because it shows where the different interests are, and also that people need to talk to each other to better understand each other and then come to shared solutions and actions. So cooperation, for me, that came out. But I'd like to quote Lucie. She said we have a speed problem, because indeed it's about acting now. So it's not, again, analyzing what the actions are that we need, but it's actually implementing them and also come to shared decisions there. So I think now is the time with the new Commission. The Parliament is also ready to discuss it. And the action plan, you asked our panelists about it a number of times. We need to indeed see that action plan soon with concrete actions, because it's too easy for the Commission to just pass the buck again to the member states now, and that they should just sort it out. I think that isn't working well enough so far. So let's get them to
and
action.
you emphasise the importance there of that discussion, sometimes disagreeing, but working towards solutions that will really deliver this approach. And that is what this series is all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's why we're organizing a number of debates. And just to come back to the TML study that we heard about earlier today, and I was really pleased also to hear Kurt van den Bergen say that he's going to look at it, but also take it on board of that action plan, because I think the TML study also again showed, I think they looked at the grid, at the consumer dimension, the manufacturing dimension, and also the infrastructure side. All of that needs to be looked at, and it starts with proper analysis and monitoring, and then taking action. So that would be my call to action, indeed, to echo Kurt, hold him to account, and that he indeed does what he says.
Watch this space. As we've said, this is the first in a series of more than 30 events that will take place under the Future Driven banner in this venue over the next 6 weeks. You can go on the website, the Future Driven website, and find details, and you can register for any of the events you want to attend, whether it be here in the room or joining online. But thank you so much to those of you who joined us today, online and in the room. Your reward awaits. Please do visit the exhibition area downstairs. There will be dessert served and coffee served. I think many of you had something to eat before we started, but we round off with dessert, coffee, and take a look at the fabulous exhibition. Thank you again to all our great speakers today. Sigrid, thank you to you and your team for a wonderful event, and good luck with the rest of the series. Thank you.